All right. Welcome, everyone. This is our next installment to our Grow Up Live series. And in fact, in this case, we actually have a command performance. We've got somebody who's wearing the two-time jacket for being on these Grow Up Live series. So we're very happy and excited about today's presentation. I'm Av Singh. I'm part of the advisory board for the Grow Up Conference. Um, Randy Rowe and Dania Dixon are busily preparing the Grow Up Conference, which is now officially scheduled for Niagara Falls, October 5th, 6th, and 7th. So let's, for those who are going to go and get their vaccine, get it ready so we can all meet in person. I know myself, I've promised so many people drinks and stuff. It's going to be quite a costly conference for myself, but I do look forward to visiting with folks. So that's October 5th, 6th, and 7th in Niagara Falls. We will be meeting live with the trade show and all of the precautions that we have to do in our pandemic world. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our moderator, who I believe is our third time moderating sessions between Grow Up Live and OCannabiz. Bridget Hoffer is with Marigold Public Relations and Communications. I'd like to introduce Bridget as the person who made CBC cool again. And so she's did a lot of work with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and then has jumped on to doing PR and communications work with Marigold. A lot of our clients in this competitive world of cannabis and hemp, you need any advantage you have, and that's what a good communications and branding company can do, which Marigold does a great job of. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Bridget. I do encourage people to ask questions in the chat, connect on the chat. We have had over 230 registrants for this. So, and we got a lot of questions in advance. I know Bridget's got a lot of questions for our repeat guests and the Vantage Hemp group. So looking forward to hearing from our panelists as well as our audience members. So please ask questions. Bridget, all yours.
Oh, thanks, Av, and thanks for the warm welcome and the terrific recommendation about Marigold. I'm the co-founder with Katie Pringle from Marigold PR, and we're delighted to be here with two of our clients from Vantage Hemp company based in Greeley, Colorado, which is now becoming one of the leading accredited extractors in the U.S. And from the team, we have Deepank Utkade, Chief Operations Officer, and Deepank is just so fabulous at bringing the crowd and bringing the audience into understanding the whole process. So we're just thrilled to have him here. And then Christian Santee, Director of Sales and Marketing at Vantage, who has recently joined and brings years of experience in sales and building teams. I'll let you guys talk a little bit about yourselves, but welcome, and we're thrilled to have you here. So we'll start with a little introduction from Deepank and followed by Christian, and then we're just going to jump into some questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Bridget. That was a very nice welcome. Yeah, my name is Deepank Utkade. I'm Chief Operating Officer for Vantage Hemp. I come from a pharma background, and I've applied a lot of that to the systems and processes that we've put in place at Vantage Hemp that, for the most part, made our certification process go fairly smoothly. So that's a bit of my background.
Great. Over to you, Christian.
Yeah, I'm Christian Santi. I'm the Director of Sales here at Vantage Hemp. My background is mostly stemming from nutraceutical ingredients, pharma ingredients, flavors and fragrances. So with the importation and distribution of things nationally and globally, taking some of those things that we've learned over the years and applying them to the ingredients sector of here in the hemp space.
Welcome. It's so great to have you guys here. So how we're going to kind of work through this conversation, we're going to get some insights on certification process considerations. And then Deepank's going to walk us through some design and equipment considerations. And then we'll start taking some questions after we answer some inspection and audit questions. So welcome. And so the first question is for you, Christian. What is the difference between, okay, there's all these acronyms. What is the difference between EU GMP, NA GMP, and Q7 GMP for active pharmaceutical ingredients, meaning API?
Yeah, that's pretty complex. So let's just backtrack a little bit. GMP basically stands for good manufacturing practices, right? It stems from the pharmaceutical industry itself for the production of active pharmaceutical ingredients, and it's been it's grown into a quality certification for all types of manufacturing of good products. So it's basically a quality standard, right, to be met, and it's usually understood internationally, right? There are differences depending on what your region is. Obviously, for us, we're in North America, so North America GMP is a little bit different than EU European GMP, and it really stems from the way you report and double check your quality afterwards. In
Okay.
North American GMP, you will do a quality product review, right, on an annual basis. You know, in EU, you do a product review into the quality of the finished good. You know, and it's really trying to target the same thing. Q7 is different because that's specifically for pharmaceutical, active ingredients, and Deepank really has a tremendous amount of experience when it comes to that firsthand. So that's, and from my understanding, and Deeps, feel free to correct me. Right, it's just a much stricter measures of accountability when it comes to production and quality.
Right, and the primary international standard that most countries use is the ICH guideline, the Q7. That's so the ICH stands for the International Committee on Harmonization, and basically this committee is tasked with trying to set a global standard for that everyone can use, so that when you're trying to go from country to country or region to region, that you're not having to change GMPs. So they were kind of tasked with this responsibility to develop a set of standards that everyone could use, that everyone could comply with. And they have a number of different standards. They have 1 through, I can't remember now, 11, 12, but 7 is specific for active pharmaceutical ingredients. And if you if you type in FDA, active pharmaceutical ingredients, GMPs, when you click to the FDA website, it will actually link directly to the ICH Q7 guidelines. Same thing with the European. If you go to Uterlux, it will link you to the ICH. So Q7 is nice. That has become like an internet. Well, they've achieved that. They've become an international standard. Where things start to diverge is when you start making finished goods. Finished goods still hasn't been harmonized, and so you then have to look at specific countries and their regulations with regards to complying with the GMPs.
Okay, thank you. So that's the answer on the GMPs, the Q7, the NA, and the EU. What does this achievement mean for a company like Vantage entering different markets? So what does it mean to have these accreditations for a company like Vantage?
Well, for us, Bridget, it's paramount. The way the company was structured and what our goal was is to be a global company, right? So by achieving these quality certifications, right, it essentially allows us to enter any market on a global scale with limited amount of or minimal amount of pivoting when it comes to individual regulatory standards. I mean, we can go into Australia, we can go into Europe, we can go into Latin America, Mexico. It doesn't matter. The standards are internationally understood, right? And again, it's just a small amount of just wiggling around some of the local regulatory.
Wow. So it's kind of like securing a global exporting passport.
It really does. It's something that allows us to truly be a global force.
Wow.
It
Congratulations.
also provides a level of assurance to our customers. Part of the GMPs is, the way they're structured is you don't test quality into the product. So you don't just do your process and your final product, you test it, it passes, you send it off. The GMPs require you to build quality into every step of the process. So whether that's, the biomass coming in, making sure that it meets specifications, each step along the way that goes from, that biomass to your isolate, you've built quality into every step of the process. So you have traceability and accountability throughout that entire manufacturing process. And you can provide that to your customers, especially if they come and do a site audit to review your manufacturing process.
Yeah, it builds a sense of confidence and trust for your customers because they can totally see what they're doing. So what are key questions? So as you're thinking this through, because I think our audience, we're over 100 now. What are some of the key questions facility operators should ask before beginning the certification process, Deepank? Which internal reviews are necessary?
Well, okay, so that's a great question. So let me just share my screen. I have a couple of slides too.
Okay.
That we can you see
Yep.
the slides? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at CGMP compliance, when you look at the regulations, those really are the minimum requirements that they expect you to achieve. They expect you to have a change control procedure, investigation procedures, a training program, all of that. But what the regulatory bodies are a little sneaky. What they require you to do is they require you to comply with CGMPs. And what that little c means is current good manufacturing practices. So what they expect you to do is comply with what the industry is doing as a whole right now. And really, when we look at our compliance, we're referring back to the pharma industry. So if whatever that industry is doing in terms of compliance is what we're expected to do. And one of the big things is when you look at audits by those regulatory agencies, they do what's called a quality systems approach. And what that means is they kind of treat your entire process, your entire system like a spider web. Everything is interconnected. Mm-hmm. When I mean interconnected, like, so you have a batch record that tells you how you manufacture a product. So you go through the batch record, but let's say there's an issue with it, and something didn't go according to plan. That issue must be addressed. You can't just kind of write it off and just keep going. You have to start an investigation. They'll look at, okay, how did you open an investigation to address that issue? And in that investigation, they're going to look at, did you investigate properly? Did you do a deep dive investigation, or did you just do a superficial? It's not going to affect the product. You sign off on it and off you go. Or did you actually go through and say, okay, they want to see that you identified the problem, you investigated the problem, you identified the root cause, and most importantly, is you put CAPAs in place that make sure that it doesn't happen again. And CAPA stands for corrective actions, preventative actions. So if you've got an issue and it's come up, you put a corrective action in place so it doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. Or if you identify a problem before an issue happens, you put a preventative action in place. But they want to make sure that everything is documented accurately. So if they look at your batch record and they see that there was a problem, and they want to see, okay, where's the investigation? So they're pulling on the strings of that web. Mm-hmm. A properly set up system is you start pulling on those strings, the spider web stays intact. Right. What they're really looking for is if they pull on a string and everything just falls apart. Like you've got a batch record, it's version 2. Okay, where's the change control that went from version 1 to version 2 that shows what you changed, why you changed it, and what impact it would have? If you don't have that, that's your spider web starting to fall apart. So that's an important point to keep in mind when you look at compliance. So you got to make sure that everything is in place
Mhm.
and everything's being utilized. It's not just having it in place, it's actually utilizing it to on your day-to-day systems. In terms of what you need to have in place for your audit, and this is a
Yeah.
critical point.
Yeah.
GMP compliance, for the most part, is it's self-regulation, because you don't have a GMP auditor sitting in your facility watching every process, every minute of every day to ensure that you're complying. The compliance is self-regulation. They want to make sure that you have the systems in place to ensure that if a problem comes up, that you can identify it and correct it. So when you look at that, the things that they look for when they do a compliance audit or a certification audit, they're looking for self-audit. And the self-audit is not just completing a self-audit. It's being critical, being self-critical. It's not bad for you to go through a self-audit, find issues and correct them. What's bad is doing a self-audit, finding no issues and saying everything's hunky-dory, sign off on it, and then auditor comes in and starts going through your systems and they find all these problems.
Right.
So they want to actually see self-audits with issues. They want to see you find the issues. They want to see you address the issue. And then they also want to make sure that you have systems in place to ensure that those issues are effective, have been corrected, and the correction is effective. They want to see you do annual product reviews. So they want you to go through the quality of the products you produce and just make sure that everything's meeting, anything that doesn't meet, that you've got an action in place, whether you reject it, whether you rework it, what have you done? Management reviews, and this is important because they want to see management engaged in the quality process. They just don't want to see the operators be responsible for quality. It's a top-down approach, and management needs to be driving it. They also want to see that you've done a recall procedure. And when I say that, a mock recall, basically, you pretend something's wrong and then you show your process works, that you've identified it, you know what products it went into, and you can recall all that material back to the company and account for it all. So those four things are along with everything else in terms of compliance. Those four things are things that they're going to look for certification. If you don't have any of those are going to impede at least an ability to pull it out and show them that you've done it. That's going to impede your ability to get certified.
Okay.
And then I can't stress this enough. You have to be critical of yourself.
Right.
You have to show that you are able to self-regulate. If you can't, they're not going to have any compliance. They're not going to have any confidence that you're going to be able to self-regulate.
Okay. Do you want to keep? Okay, so
Nope,
we're just going to come back. We'll come back to that in a minute, but we're just going to go back to Christian. Thanks for that, Deepank. So when we're looking at the EU GMP, would you like to comment, Christian, a little bit on what EU GMP certification might encounter with the new Brexit trade deal? Will this affect any timelines?
Well, it might. In all honesty, the Brexit situation has created a little bit of an unknown, situation for the industry itself, and honestly for all manufacturers going into the UK. It's unclear whether they're going to, toe the line and support the EU's standards, right, or will they set their own standards for things when it comes to safety and quality. All indicators right now, right, maintain that they're going to follow suit with EU GMPs, right, but
Okay.
that may change, But for now, this is how everything is lining up. So we're in a very good position when it comes
Good.
to.
So when we think about your expansion and other companies who might be expanding globally, so Latin America, Australia, Europe, across North America, should all producers pursue a GMP and Q7 GMP certification, even if it's a lengthy and expensive process, do you think?
I would say if nothing else, from your customer's point of view, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's expensive. It's time consuming. I mean, our audits took upwards of 3 months.
Yeah.
and it's intensive. You know, it puts a lot of stress on your staff, right, on your upper management, on your directors, all the way to the top, because you're expecting to you want your products to develop, you want your products to succeed, and you want your customers to be absolutely delighted with what they receive. You know,
Exactly.
at least that's our approach to it. You know, so if you're going to be a real player with this and not just be a couple of guys, you know, with an extractor on a dirt floor, you know, yeah, these certifications are paramount to the success of the company in the long run. And that type of investment is, I don't see how you can thumb your nose at it.
Right. Okay. That's great insight, especially when you think about, you know, how consumers want to know what's in the products, where it comes from, the processing, et cetera. Those are key decision factors.
Absolutely. Today is the day of transparency.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah,
we need to
exactly.
be able to open those doors.
So can you just touch a little bit on membership to the European Industrial Hemp Association? Did that help in obtaining your certification? What are the benefits of becoming a member for Vantage?
Well, I mean, the EIHA didn't exactly help us with the EU GMP certification, but it does give us a direct line to the specifically UK novel food classification. So with the Brexit situation, they've developed this thing called novel food in the UK, which was existed in the EU previously. You know, so a lot of the rules cross over. So these products have to be, if you're going to be selling anything in the UK, especially now with that's cannabis or cannabinoid based, the product has to go through a certification process. You have to develop a complete dossier for the product, basically proving that it's safe. You know, and this consortium of the EIHA helps us pool our funds together, you know, and pool our efforts of both not only just our mind space and intelligence, you know,
Mhm.
but also as a group that we can put together a a better dossier. It's the best way I can explain it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous benefit to do it. When we're not the only group in this, right? We're one of the few American groups, right,
Mhm.
in the consortium. But we've realized a long time ago that Europe and the UK are pivotal markets for us. So these type of investments, you know, they were no brainers.
Good. Good. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go back over to Deepank. So we are getting questions in the chat
Mhm.
about the length of time and expense, et cetera. But I think one of the questions that's coming up is it beneficial to work with a consulting firm to help you with the certification process, Deepank?
Um, it depends on your internal expertise. Advantage, we had a lot of internal expertise, and what that
Mhm.
allowed for is for us to set up the systems necessary um, uh, for a successful certification audit. If and it's more than just reading the regulations and then putting systems in place. A lot of it comes from experience. Having that experience on staff will allow you to basically avoid having to go to a consulting firm. If you don't have that experience on staff, then it will definitely be beneficial to bring in a consulting firm to help you set up the systems, because you just won't have the ability to put in an effective, like, investigation is your investigation procedure is the first thing they're going to come to. And
Mhm.
it's not just a question of setting up a procedure to say we will investigate when things go wrong. No, it's you will clearly lay out that you will investigate it, how you will investigate it, the definition of what a corrective action is, what a preventive action is, and also how that's going to be put together in your final documents, and but also in an actual investigation. So having that experience is critical. So for Vantage, myself, I come from 22 years in pharmaceutical development, finished drug manufacturing and API. Our director of quality also came from about 30 years of pharma experience in the device industry. And then our quality manager, she also has a few years of experience specifically in CBD. So it was a well-rounded team
Mhm.
that was able to put the system together.
Great. So consultants, if you don't have the in-house, you know,
Absolutely.
but with a focus to build on the outside, on the internal team as well to
Right.
balance it. Thank you for
And I would,
the, sorry,
and just,
go ahead.
I would also recommend that you go to the pharma industry for that consultation, not from the CBD or the cannabis market, because it is so new. There's just
Right.
not enough experience in that market right now.
Okay, that's amazing insight as well. That's a really good tip for our audience. So
Mm.
thanks, Christian and Deep for touching on that part. And now we're going to go. Oh, Deepak, you've got a bit of a slideshow of, you know, a slide presentation on design and equipment considerations that
Right.
we thought we would touch on. I think the
Okay,
audience
sure.
would be very interested in that.
Yeah, so this deck will look at um, in terms of setting up your facility and
Yeah.
what you need to take into account, because it's a delicate balance between achieving GMPs but also satisfying safety and building code requirements. So you know, if you look at your building codes, you have to look at your local building codes for your general structure, plumbing, all that sort of stuff. But because our industry uses, well, frankly, dangerous processes like you know, extraction using either high pressure CO2 or liquid propane, you know, crystallization using pentane, which is a horrendous solvent, and then, you know, vast amounts of alcohol for the winterization process. You have to look at your international building codes and your international fire codes for guidance on how to build these areas and how to build a safe facility, but a facility that will also get approved. And these things are like GMP regulations or any government regulations, they're very complex and completely open to interpretation. So when we look at, well, what are the first steps? How do you apply all this? How do you understand what's important? The first step is to assess what processes are being used. And this is, you know, using CO2 or using hydrocarbon, using ethanol, or using a combination of all three. Rough design of the space, and don't forget that you need to account for storage of these hazardous solvents, whether it's liquid propane or CO2 or alcohol or propane. And not only do you need to store the good stuff, you need to store the waste. And these are all going to be, you know, you have to take these all into account. And you need to start with an estimate of your hazardous material volumes. What that gives you is a starting point for the design of the facility and how you design the rooms within that facility. So from that, you can start doing your code analysis. And I highly recommend at this point, you hire an outside firm, and specifically a safety engineering firm. We used Jensen Hughes, and they cut their teeth on in the oil and gas industry. So they're very familiar with dangerous environments, which is basically what CBD extraction is. So we hired them to do a full code review and basically create a document to say, okay, these are all the applicable codes. This is how we're going to apply it. And then we take that and we can present that to the local officials, most important of which is the fire marshal, because he will have ultimate sign off on the facility. He needs to be comfortable with the code analysis. He needs to be comfortable that it's been done properly. You got to remember, when you go into most of these jurisdictions, what you're presenting them with in terms of an extraction facility, they have never seen before, and they don't know how to apply the code. So if you just say, we're building this, and you hand them the designs, they're going to have to spend months going through all the codes, international and the local and international building and fire code, to understand what needs to be applied, how it should be applied, and did you apply that as part of your design phase. If you give them a full code analysis, it cuts their work in half. Well, it cuts their work down to nothing. It goes from months of design, months of review, to 2 or 3 weeks. We had our building permits within 2 to 3 weeks of submission after presenting them with a complete code analysis. That that gave them a level of comfort that, you know, we weren't cutting any corners.
Good.
So then you also have to look at how you apply those codes. So, you know, you've got, because all the solvent, all these flammable areas for, you know, winterization, CO2, or not CO2, but hydrocarbon, crystallization, all those need classified spaces. You have to look at how you're going to classify, whether it be control space versus classified space. Control spaces are easier. You know, you need 1 hour rated walls, proper ventilation. But there are some limitations. You're limited to 4 per building. You have limits on the amount of hazardous materials allowed in the space, but you can place them anywhere in the building, which is convenience. And it works well for contained processes like hydrocarbon extraction. Classified spaces have more regulations around. They got more regulations around ventilation and egress, but you can have an unlimited amount of classified spaces within a building. The amount of hazardous materials, or the volumes that you're allowed to have in those rooms, is virtually unlimited. You just have to justify it at the start, and you can adjust it as you get into production, but it's virtually unlimited. One of the key limitations of that is 25% of the perimeter of the perimeter wall has to be on an outside wall. You can't put it in the center of a building. And you absolutely need this for high volume solvents, like for winterization and crystallization with flammable materials. So the next slide here kind of shows you our layout for our what we call our Raven building, which is our hydrocarbon extraction building, which also houses our winterization room, crystallization, and also distillation. So you can see here, can you see my mouse?
Yep. Okay,
so you can see we've got control rooms for our hydrocarbon extraction rooms. So these are located within the building. There's no outside wall associated with it, as opposed to our winterization room, which we've classified as being able to hold up to 2,000 gallons of methanol. You can see this room here is a classified room, not a control area. So it's got 25% of its outside wall, of its perimeter, is on an outside wall. Now that poses some other issues. Now you've got an outside wall adjacent to your manufacturing space, which is a problem because you've got doors which won't seal properly, so you can have contamination. So what we've done is we've put in an airlock, basically. So basically a separation. So the outside wall, and then you have an airlock in here, and then another wall with doors. But these doors are only emergency exit doors. So these are not used on a regular basis. So that provides a separation of the manufacturing space from the outside. So it keeps the manufacturing space clean.
Cool. That is so, that's an innovative approach.
Yeah. And so what we've also done here, the crystallization room, is a room within a room. And the reason why I did this is because of the pentane, it's explosive and flammable, and it's got a very low boiling point. You need 2-hour rated walls for this. So by having this within a room, so this wall here is 2-hour rated, but these other 2 walls are only 1-hour rated because it's already inside a room that's already got 1-hour rated walls. So these walls here that are in red are 1-hour rated. So things to take into account when you're looking at building design and complying with those regulations. Safety considerations, and this is paramount, and this is what the fire department is really, the fire marshal is really going to be focusing his time on, because he's not only going to be looking at the safety of the people working the facility, but also the safety of first responders in case of a situation. So, and you always hope for nothing to go wrong, but you have to put systems in place in case something does. So you're looking for gas. We have gas detection throughout, depending on, and they're specific to the room that they're in. So we have CO2 detection, oxygen detection, propane and pentane. So if there's a leak or a spill or something, that you have detection. And when it gets dangerous, everyone leaves. So you also have fire and smoke detection, but it's not only in the room, but it's also in the ducts. So if you ever have fire in the duct, or if the fire gets into a duct before it gets into the room, it shuts everything down. In the rooms where we're relevant, we have two-stage APAC. So you have HVAC, so you have normal HVAC flow during normal conditions, and if a sensor goes off, you suddenly go into a very high level so that it's able to evacuate the room with any noxious fumes. We got electrical disconnect so that when it goes into alarm, basically power is cut to all the processing equipment. Then we also have emergency power generators, and this supplies emergency power to critical HVAC under alarm conditions, or if there's a power outage and then an alarm at the same time. So it makes sure that the building is as safe as possible, people to allow people to egress. Then you also have like the simple things like grounding, gowning. You include grounding straps so that there's no minimize static. Fire resistant lab coats, just as a precautionary measure. And critical part of safety is training, making sure that people are trained properly to use the equipment and the facilities. So if you look at just our gas detection, this is in our pentane, this is in our crystallization room. So these are pentane detectors. So each of the gas detectors are specific for the gas of interest. So and the pentane detectors you can see in the room, they're located low because pentane is a heavier gas. So if you do have a spill, that gas will sit low. And so the location is important and you need to justify that. Notification, notification is, we have visual and auditory. So you can see here on the right is the alert notification. So when a situation is achieved that's dangerous but not critical, basically the alert goes off, and it basically it's an indicator to the operators that something is not right. Something needs to be fixed, something needs to be corrected. Otherwise, we are going to go into alarm. It's going to be a dangerous situation. Once it goes into alarm, which is our evacuate, and so these are white strobes. Once it goes into alarm, you evacuate the building. You can't fix anything. It's just an immediate evacuation. Everyone stands outside until the fire department arrives and they deal with the situation. So important to have alert and alarm levels and clearly label everything. So that's the safety aspects. And so as we get into the GMP design considerations, GMPs are, they're around, protecting the product, preventing contamination, ensuring that there's proper documentation. So in terms of preventing contamination of your manufacturing spaces, make sure you have proper ways to get materials and equipment into the facility. So we've used airlock systems, basically a set of double doors with a space in the middle, providing separation from the interior clean space from the basically dirty space on the outside in the rest of the building. So you can take your materials, put it inside that room, you exit, then someone who's gowned, who's on the outside of the doors, will open the other doors, wipe down the material with IPA and wipes, and then bring it into the facility. The system is set up so that both sets of doors cannot be open at the same time. So they're interlocked. And of course, training is always important. Gowning, of course, always have a dedicated room for gowning. We have a clean line, that's that yellow line on the floor. Basically, everything on the other side of that line is, in quotations, clean. So when you put on your shoe cover, so you put on your lab coat, hairnet, beard cover, if applicable, and then when you put on your booties, you basically put the booty on, and that bootied foot only goes on the clean side of that line. Then you put on your other booty, bring it over. You then wash your hands and proceed with putting on your safety goggles, a grounding strap, and entering the facility. Gowning, I mean, this is standard. It's hairnet, making sure that all hair is up and underneath it. Fire resistant lab coat, that's for safety, but also to protect the product. Gloves, shoe covers, safety glasses, grounding straps, and of course training. We've also made it so that any jewelry, any exposed jewelry must be removed. So rings have to be removed. Any dangling, any bracelets has to be removed, watches have to be removed, because those are points where a couple of things. One, it could get caught on equipment and then pose a safety concern, but also it's a contamination risk.
Mhm.
So that needs to be removed. If you look at material flow is absolutely critical when you're designing a facility. So how we've designed our facility is raw materials come in through this airlock here, and comes through the facility. And as it proceeds down the hallway, basically it gets purer and purer. So you've got crude being produced here. You've got then that crude is converted to FSO here. Then distillation happens here, and then finally crystallization. So raw materials come in through this airlock. Finished goods exit through this airlock, and then they go into our inventory storage room. Waste comes back out through this airlock. It doesn't go through our finished goods. So material flow is unidirectional through this facility. Oh, and that's my last slide.
Wow, that that is so all-encompassing, and thank you very much for that overview. While you were going through it, and you're so focused and giving us such good information, are there challenges that some extractors overlook, Deepak? Like, are there areas that you would remind people not to overlook?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of it. No, it's a very
Stick to
global
the
question.
slides. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean, a lot of things that, some of the things that we ran into were utilities. I mean, just making sure that you account for nitrogen supply, compressed air supply, things like, cooling water for your falling film evaporator. A lot of things that, vendors won't say is, here's our falling film evaporator, but they'll forget some of the ancillary equipment that you need to buy on your own that's not part of the equipment. So really you have to do some really thorough research into what the equipment actually requires, but also be prepared that regardless of what the vendor tells you will more often than not be wrong. We often we got electrical diagrams from our equipment vendors and said, this is exactly the electrical that you need. Equipment shows up completely different, so we have to rip it all back out and put in new.
Oh my
So
God.
just be prepared for that.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of work in advance, but be prepared that you're going to be redoing some of that work.
Okay, I'm just going to go to one last question on equipment and considerations. Is innovation and extraction technology driven by consumer demand, like depending on what people are looking for? What pressures are there on extractors to keep up with product advancements?
I think in terms of advancements in extraction and purification technology, that's really driven by us as the extractor, because we're looking for, ultimately we want to get to a place where two things. One, we end up with a more efficient process, a more better quality product, or better yields on that product. But the other side is, if we can move away from the harsh chemicals and processes that are currently used, that is something that will really drive the advancements in extraction, for at least on my side. When I look at the process, if we can keep the same efficiencies, but suddenly we're going to like a supercritical water, extraction process, that's something that we would embrace with open arms.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all of those questions. I'm just looking at our time. It's 2:45. I think we're going to move over to answer some questions from the audience. We've got a few coming in, Av.
Oh yeah, we certainly got quite a few. Thanks, Bridget, and thanks, Deeps and Christian. I'm going to start out very quickly for a couple of quick questions for Christian. The first one, you were talking a little bit about the novel foods export license. Can you just clarify a little bit around the novel foods export license and EU GMP? Can they be used together? Should they be used together?
Um, it gets a little confusing with novel foods and EU GMP. The way we've approached it, in all honesty, is if we've achieved EU GMP, we should be able to achieve novel food classification also. Right? Novel food is really something that came about, and if you go through the history of it, it's for items that were not in the food system prior to 1996 in Europe. All right. So what you have to do is basically submit this dossier for the ingredient or product that you're introducing into the food system that it's completely and totally safe. Now, little different than what EU GMP is. The GMP is a quality system, but they do work hand in hand. It in and Deeps. Let me know your thoughts on this too. If we're able to achieve EU GMPs for our product, right, the achievement of novel food classification is easier.
Yeah, and yeah, they go kind of hand in hand because you're exactly right, Christian. The EU GMPs basically says that the product is manufactured to a quality standard, that it is safe for well, it's to that predetermined quality spec. The novel foods says it's safe to consume, is where the difference comes down. And so when you look at novel foods, they're saying they're doing toxicity studies to show that whatever compound it is for us, CBD or CBG or distillate, is safe for human consumption. There's no unknown toxicities associated with it, which is where that classification of novel foods has come from.
Great, thanks. Just going through some more of those acronyms. Here in Canada, oftentimes with the licensing program, we're using the language around good production practices, GPP. Very quickly, can you just talk a little bit about the differences between GPP, GMP, and maybe even throw in something around HACCP, because I know that that's often thrown around as well.
Right, so those are mainly, GMP really is around pharmaceutical products. So, and pharmaceutical, the regulations around it are the highest, not only because you're administering it to humans, but you're talking about a product that has potentially, it's not just a carrot per se. It's got something that has a physiological mechanism of action in the body. It binds to receptors. It causes an effect. So you want to make sure that when you say your product is 100% or CBD isolate is 99.9% CBD, your testing shows that, but also all the processes leading up to it ensure that there's no contamination or adulteration of that product, because you're giving it to people who are taking it to they're taking it for specific effects. They want control their inflammation, they want more restful sleep, they got anxiety, so they want to make sure that you want to ensure that they're getting a product that's safe for them to consume and is what it says it is. So if you say it's 100%, then it actually is 100%, and you have confidence that it is that. The HACCPs are more around food. So they want to make sure that there's no contamination in terms of, pathogens like salmonella, listeria, E. coli, those sort of things. And that your sanitization procedures and systems are in place to prevent that kind of contamination. Whereas, when we look at GMPs, it's more of that whole system-based approach to ensure that you have compliance. And not to say that HACCP can go into GMPs, and we do have a HACCP plan in place to cover us off on that. But because if you have a HACCP plan, doesn't mean you're GMP.
Right. So I mean, and again, Deep's here from Canada, so you can fill in a little bit more on my experience with the GPP. It was mostly for, especially when it refers to the cannabis business, that it controls all stages of the cultivation and the manufacturing
Yeah.
process. Definitely very deep into SOPs. The sanitation program and a recall procedure. But I mean, if the GMPs were basically pharmaceutically and internationally accepted, so if you're really going to do business worldwide, it behooves you to be GMP certified, because the GMP is going to, on top of everything that GPP does, you're looking at supply qualification, stability programs, environmental assessment, transportation, equipment qualifications, process validation. I mean, it goes on. It's just a level above.
And when we talk about that level above, that's before you got into this whole process. Were you often misled to think of this is what GMP stands for? You have to have done this or that. Oftentimes you get those myths coming from perhaps even consultants where they're telling you that this is what GMP is and maybe it's not. So even if we look at for example, there's a question here about, do the EU GMP requirements include cleaning validation for product contact surfaces on the manufacturing of equipment?
Yes.
Manufacturing equipment. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, it covers everything. No, so when you look, and you have to understand what to apply and how to apply it. For us, it's CBD extraction. We have hemp biomass coming in. We've got CBD isolate coming out. It's one product. If we had multiple products coming through, that cleaning validation looks very different, because now you got to prove that not only is your equipment clean, but that it doesn't have any carryover from the previous product, and it does that, so that doesn't contaminate your new product. But if we've got just CBD going through, well, then that's a much easier process. You still have to prove that it's clean, but your cross-contamination is less of an issue because it's the same product going through. Going back to, understanding GMPs, and it goes back to, what Bridget and I were talking earlier. It helps to have a pharma consultant for GMPs, because if you get with someone who looks at just hemp GMPs, that's not the same level. That's not even a thing. you need to apply active pharmaceutical ingredient GMPs. If you're going to say you're GMP, that's what you have to apply. You can't apply this subset that doesn't exist. It's GMPs are, if you say you're GMP, they're going to come in and inspect you to GMPs. They're going to inspect you to whatever standard of that regulatory body is from, to that standard, and you have to achieve those. So the most experience out there is the pharma industry. They have the GMPs were based on the pharma industry, and they have the most experience with it.
So let's say I'm a hemp grower in Colorado. I want to sell my product to Vantage Hemp. It's going to arrive at your door, or will it arrive at your door? What's the kind of the process that I would use to try to sell my product to you? And then when it gets to if you buy it and it gets to your doors, what process do you go through?
So it's fairly standard in terms of the process. So we're going to want to see that you're licensed to grow hemp in the state. We're going to want to see your state certificate of compliance for that harvest to show that it is legal hemp. So it's less than 0.3% THC. We will then bring your material in house, and we take none of the testing from the grower. We do all of our own testing in-house. So we sample every bag for potency, and then we create a composite sample, which we send out to a third-party lab where we confirm the potency of that composite sample. But we also test for heavy metals, pesticides, and microbial contamination. And what that gives us is a snapshot of whether it was grown properly, was it harvested properly, and was it stored properly. That gives us everything we need to know on that material. This is, after all, an agricultural product. I mean, there is a certain level of expectation that yes, it's grown in the field, it's harvested, but it still needs to be clean and free and meet all the regulations for pesticides, heavy metals, and microbial before we'll bring it into our extraction.
So a big part about GMP is definitely all of the manufacturing and equipment and so on. But there is all that whole aspect of record keeping, and the question came across of how important is the software that you're using as an ERP or a QMS, and are there any specific ones that you would feel comfortable recommending?
I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending any right now. We haven't put any software systems in place. And just bear in mind that if you put software in place and that's your primary mode of record keeping, you then now have to comply with Part 11 compliance, which is software validation. So you have to ensure that software has audit trail. If anyone changes anything, you know exactly who he did it. Like it's a whole other level of certification. We've intentionally stayed away from that. We don't feel it's necessary, at least on the extraction side. If we were like an IKEA and had just if we're an IKEA and we had just a 800 SKUs, then absolutely. But we only have a handful, so we're keeping everything paper-based. It's just a lot easier to control, and you don't have to go through that whole software validation. So yeah.
I don't know if I have permission to keep asking questions, but I do. This webinar was scheduled for a different period. At that time, you were going through an audit or a certification process. Do you want to speak a little bit on what that was like?
So yeah, so we employed we hired SGS to do our certification. And the way that certification process works, at least for initial certification, it's a series of 3 audits. They got basically a pre-audit to say, are you ready? Then they do a stage 1 audit, which says, okay, we're going to do it. So the pre-audit is basically a superficial. Do you have your systems? Do you have your basics in place? And then it'll identify a few things that are missing. Then they'll do a stage 1 audit, which kind of goes deeper. It goes into your documentation. It pulls out like an investigation and goes through it and looks at, how did you conduct the investigation, was done properly, that sort of thing. And then the final step is a stage 3 audit. And that's what we were undergoing. That stage 3 audit is an on-site invasive is the best way to put it, audit. Think of a secondary inspection at the airport. It's very involved. They will come on site. They will observe your operators performing tasks, performing activities. They want to see that, when they complete a task, are they contemporaneously completing the documentation associated with that task? Or, are they doing a task, finishing everything, and then going back and then signing off saying that they've done it? They really want to see that the training's in place. They'll go through and say, okay, this operator's doing this task. Show me his training record that shows that he is trained to do that. Like, it's really involved. Very, it's that, again, it goes back to that system based approach, that spider web. He wants to pull on a bunch of different strings, and he wants to make sure that web stays intact, or does it just collapse into a pile of string on the bottom?
Okay, amazing. I am going to ask a few more questions. I hope you have the time. They'll do some post webinar editing to keep this down to an hour, I'm sure. There is a question, just most recent question I see here is do you need to be GACP to be GMP compliant?
I'm gonna claim ignorance here. GACP?
Good agricultural collecting practices.
No, you don't.
So
GMP is basically what comes into your facility, and then how you you treat that and your systems in place for that processing. There is part of it that, you know, all your suppliers, part of your GMP system is you audit all your suppliers to ensure that they are compliant and providing you with adequate materials. Grower, you don't need to be GACP to be GMP for our facility to be GMP compliant.
For yours. Okay. So you don't actually go back to your farmers and necessarily get a detailed batch report.
Exactly. Because
Listing.
it doesn't exist. Quite
Oh.
honestly, it doesn't exist.
Okay. So do you mind sharing how long this process took you and the actual cost, if you can put a cost to it?
You know, it's so if you want to look at just the hard cost of hiring SGS to come in and do the audits, it's about 20,000. The soft cost associated with it is much greater because you're talking about, you know, everyone working together to complete the doc. So you've got your QA group getting your quality manual in place, your basic your SOPs for change control, investigations, self-auditing, management review, all those SOPs in place from a quality aspect. But you also got all your operators developing especially for a new facility, you've got all new equipment being brought in. You can't rely on the vendors for anything. You're basically developing the process yourself. So when you look at that, you're like, you've got your operators developing the process, developing the documentation and batch records that go with it while you're developing, specifications and all that. So, we've been I think, we started our quality system before we started all of our process because, we were operational about October of last year. So that's when we started all of our process work. But we had all of our personnel in place May, June of last year. So we had, 3 or 4 months of setting up our systems, and then 3 or 4 more months of getting our systems in place. I will say that our auditor, who's from the pharma industry, was shocked at the amount of activities that we had completed and that we were able to successfully pass the stage 3 so quickly. Most facilities are in place for a year or so before they're ready. So, if you talk, everything, it's about 8 months of like almost 22 people all kind of working together to get all these systems in place.
Wow.
So add that up.
And does it have to be renewed every year, or?
It's not really a renewal. What you do is you undergo recertification audits. So on an annual basis, they'll come back in and just kind of go, okay, these are the things that we found during your last audit. You're never going to be perfect. So when you go through an audit, the goal is never to be 0 observations. The goal is to have no critical observations, because that will shut you down. that will basically the FDA will put a lock on your door and basically say you can't manufacture until you fix all this. You want no critical observations. You want no major observations. You want some minor observations that basically are areas for improvement. So because if you try to go for no observations at all, it's a very expensive endeavor. So that's so you'll always have some observations from a previous audit. The next audit come around, they'll reinspect certain things, but they'll also look to see, okay, these were our minor audits from last time. How did you address all of them? So they'll make sure that you've addressed, whatever was deficient.
Thanks again. I do notice some questions, and I'm going to direct those anyone asking to about your equipment. I would encourage you to go look at the previous Grow Up Live webinar that Vantage Hemp delivered. You did a fabulous tour. Very, very grateful for that tour of your facility. You could see your whole extraction process. So I encourage you to check that out at the Grow Up Conference website. There is a question here from Nick Peters. Could you give a licensing and requirement rundown of how someone could export cannabis oil from the US or Canada to the EU, then use the oil in the EU to manufacture cannabis edibles, and then import that cannabis edible back into Canada or the US? Is that something that
Doesn't make any sense. It would make more sense just to import into Canada and then use it within Canada rather than, because right now the EU has basically, for the most part, either shut down and made it very difficult to bring in any extracts. They have really clamped down on CBD because people have been skirting around the system, and when they say it's non-detect, it's not actually non-detect. And remember, for the EU, non-detect is not less than 0.3 or 0.1%. It's less than 0.0025% THC is what they're considering non-detect. So most testing facilities can't even reach that level. So even though they're telling you non-detect, the EU wants to see that their limit of detection, their LOD, is at 0.0025%. They'd actually prefer your LOQ, or the limit of quantitation, to be at 0.0025%. In order to assure that that material coming in is truly non-detect. So if you're trying to bring in anything that's above that level, you're going to have a lot of problems.
So most of what, so Vantage Hemp is not necessarily looking to send CBD isolate or distillate to Europe. That's
absolutely
not
real. Absolutely real. Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely. And we were achieving that. We're achieving those levels. just a word of warning to anyone else who's trying to ship into Europe. They need to achieve those levels. Otherwise, you'll just be stuck in customs. It'll never leave.
Okay, great. One last question. It was just somebody was looking for some clarification around your R1, R2 walls.
Oh yeah. So the classification of the walls. So 1 hour rated walls or 2 hour rated walls. 1 hour rated walls is basically the design of the wall allows for, if there's a fire in the room, that it basically won't break the wall for at least an hour. So what that does is basically provides a break so that people can escape without we're not building our walls out of plywood and kindling. And really a 1 hour rated wall is basically steel studs with, I believe it's 2 layers of dry drip rock on either side. That gives you, or is it 1? Yeah, it's 2. And then the 2 hour rated walls is just doubling up on that as well.
With that, I am going to turn it back to Bridget. But I first want to just, thank Marigold for and the work that Bridget does in terms of hosting this and moderating the panel. I'll allow her to thank Vantage Hemp. We are so happy. The amount of response that we've received, even all the questions, and I'm sure I did a terrible job of asking these questions because there's so many of them. It does speak for us to really need to have that Vantage Hemp come and join us in Niagara Falls, October 5th, 6th, and 7th. We are going to be focusing on some extraction, so we'd love to have you there. Back to you, Bridget.
Thank you, Av. It's just our pleasure and our privilege to be part of this today. I know that we'll be editing and we'll be sending it to over 200 folks across Canada and the US who are interested. Huge thanks to Deepank and Christian. We're so privileged and so proud to be working with them, and they are now, one of the leading, highest certified extractors globally. So it's just been an incredible opportunity for us to gain their insight and their experience firsthand. So thank you so much, Christian and Deepank.
Oh, you're welcome, Richard.
Great.
Yep.
And so if you have any questions, if the audience has any questions or wants to reach out, it's vantagehemp, all one word, .com. Reach or contact Parvinder Johal, the director at Vantage. So it's Harv at vantagehemp.com. And if you want to reach them and you can't, just call Marigold because we'll direct you as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. And we will see you hopefully next month. We're going to be talking about cannabis in the great outdoors and some of the pest and pathogen problems that are emerging in this growing sector. So Thanks again. Thanks to Vantage Hemp. Thanks to Marigold. And we will see you later.
Thank you.
Take care,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.